Prince Andrew will no longer be called a prince. He has been officially stripped of all his titles rather than voluntarily giving them up, and he will be moving out of Royal Lodge. We will go through what it all means and look at the Buckingham Palace statement that was issued on Thursday night, word by word, on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio at just gone 10:30, and here is senior royal correspondent Daniela Relph. Hello, Daniela.
Hello, Adam.
And also on the line is Victoria Derbyshire, not on Newsnight tonight, on Newscast. Hello.
Hi Adam. Hi, Daniela.
Right, I'd love to go through the statement from Buckingham Palace word for word, or sentence by sentence, because it is very, very striking. But before we do that, big picture, snapshot, Daniela, instant reaction, go.
Big moment, huge moment. The King, I think, acting as toughly as we have ever seen him. Pretty ruthless in the decision he's made. Many would say maybe it's a bit late, but in terms of just the straightforward decision as it exists on the table tonight, it's quite something. He has done tonight basically what monarchs have done through history, hasn't he? Like his predecessors, he has cut off a problem that is any kind of threat to the monarchy, and over a number of years, but particularly over the past couple of weeks. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as we will now know him rather than Prince Andrew, has been a huge problem and has caused reputational damage to the royal family.
I mean, interesting there that you straight away put it in the historical timeline of monarchs past, because sometimes when people do that, it feels a little bit cheesy. And I'm definitely not accusing you of doing that, but actually it is.
I mean, I don't use that lightly, and I've just been talking about it on the TV as well, and just it's a big thing to say that. But I mean, this is exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing a king in a constitutional monarchy say, "Hang on a minute, this is causing us a real problem. The royal family needs popular support to exist or to thrive, and if anything's going to dent that, then the monarchs can be ruthless." And we've seen that tonight from Charles III. In other words,
but birth isn't enough.
Birth isn't enough.
Victoria?
So, Daniela, are you saying that the King had got to the point where the Prince Andrew problem was such an issue, he was a threat to the survival of the monarchy?
I think he was a threat to how the public view the monarchy and how how they feel about it, and that really matters. How the public feel about the monarchy, whether they feel they have a consensus of public support, is really important. They're not going to please everyone. There will always be strong Republican sentiment in some quarters, but the polling's pretty consistent in terms of the monarchy. Generally, people are kind of it's okay, we'll go with it. We might not be ardent royalists, but we're quite happy it exists. The numbers had seen the damage. We'd seen it in the polling that the damage that the Prince Andrew problem had caused in the past couple of weeks. But not just that. If you just take Monday, where the King went to Lichfield Cathedral, he went on a walkabout and he was shouted at, asked if he was covering up for Epstein and Andrew. What was he hiding? You just got a sense this probably wasn't going to be the first time that would happen. And I think they just couldn't stomach that.
And I suppose a threat doesn't have to be a fatal threat. It can just be a damaging threat. Yeah,
exactly. But it was chipping away. And I think the palace felt that they just had to feel like they were getting on top of this.
And yes, the polling confirms that the Andrew thing was a big problem. But also, we know, from everybody we have spoken to in the past week and a half or so, the past 14 days, actually, since Andrew released that statement via Buckingham Palace that he was, voluntarily relinquishing his titles while, let's be honest, simultaneously retaining his titles. Everyone that we have spoken to, friends, family, members of the public, it just wasn't enough. We knew, didn't we, that something else was going to have to give. That's how it felt.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, anybody you spoke to, I mean, you can imagine, as a royal correspondent at the BBC, how many people talk to me about this and ask me questions. I have not spoken to one single person in the past 2 weeks who didn't feel that the punishment needed to feel greater for Prince Andrew, that the royal family needed to do more. And I think in the public's mind, it also had to be something simple that they could understand, not lots of tweaking around the edges with honours and titles and this and that. By stripping him of the prince, his birthright, as it were, for making him move out of his home, for taking that off him, that is something that the public could get a handle on and understand. And I think Buckingham Palace's hope is that this will feel like a big enough punishment and take some of the heat away from the situation.
Right, let's go through the statement then that we got from Buckingham Palace, which was released officially at 7 p.m. So it starts off by saying, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. So Daniela, explain what that means.
Yeah, I mean, in layman's terms, that's basically he's stripping him of the title Prince. So there are some processes that have to be gone through legislatively.
I mean,
that is a little bit complicated, but effectively, really and truly, the king has decided he's no longer going to be Prince Andrew anymore, and that is going to happen. So that process has begun. His name is going to become Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Mountbatten Windsor is the family name of the royal family. He will no longer be known as Prince Andrew.
And yeah, that's the next sentence. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And Victoria, I mean, we've both been broadcasting for quite a long time in our lives. He's always been Prince Andrew. It will take some getting used to for us to call him Andrew. Maybe, or maybe it won't.
I feel like it's not going to be that difficult.
Right.
If you think 14 days ago, Virginia Giuffre, who claimed that he sexually abused her on 3 separate occasions, her brother was on Newsnight calling on the king to strip Andrew of the prince bit of his title. 10 days ago, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous book came out. The pressure was building, and I mean, will we ever see him in public again?
I think it's pretty unlikely. Would he potentially be at a royal funeral again? I think that's possible as a family event, but I'm not sure, to be honest. I think he is now pretty much cast aside in terms of anything that is public facing.
And Andrew has denied the claims of Virginia Giuffre, which actually the king, or the statement issued in the king's name, refers to in a few sentences' time, which we'll get to shortly. Then the next sentence says, his lease on Royal Lodge has, to date, provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. So that's basically leaving Royal Lodge, which he's lived in since 2003.
Yeah, that's right. And formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease. Our understanding of that, I think, is that he has served formal notice to the Crown Estate that he will give up his lease. So, yeah, he is going to give up his lease. We're told he'll be moving out in the weeks ahead. We don't have a time frame on that from Buckingham Palace, and he will move to some kind of property on the Sandringham estate.
And it was just yesterday, wasn't it, that Parliament's Public Accounts Committee announced that they were writing to the Crown Estate because they had various pointed questions about the lease, and was the lease still legitimate, considering he was no longer a working royal? So the pressure was mounting there as well.
And we then learned later this evening, Daniela, that he'll be living in Sandringham, which is a private estate. Sometimes people think of it as a royal palace. Actually, it's a private estate, and he'll be living in a property on that estate, paid for by the king, but the king as an individual person, not as the monarch.
Yeah, the king will be paying for Prince Andrew to live on the Sandringham estate out of his own private pocket, not out of any public money or taxpayers' money. It'll be an older brother privately funding his younger brother, living in a property on Sandringham. We're told it's not going to be Wood Farm, which is where his father and the late Queen often spent a lot of time together. It won't be there. It'll be somewhere else on the estate.
And Victoria, I mean, you're pointing out about the Public Accounts Committee writing about the Crown Estate, but there are always questions about the monarch's private finances, even if the monarchy would like to keep them very private, and they might actually legally be private. People still sort of conflate them with public property.
Yes, but I mean, now that Andrew is moving out of that, I mean, I don't know. The Public Accounts Committee, do they continue asking for that information, or is it now irrelevant now that this move has been made by the king to ask him to get out, to evict him, to evict his brother, essentially? But clearly, the king, I'm guessing, wouldn't want questions to be asked about his finances and the voluntary arrangement that he has about whether he pays inheritance tax. There are so many questions that are being raised, not just about Andrew, but about the king and the queen's finances and the way they live as well.
And then we get to two just quite amazing sentences in this statement. One says, these censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? You know, that they've made the point that he continues to deny the allegations against him, but still they felt that censure was needed. And what they are saying about that behind the scenes is he is being punished for his lack of judgment. They are aware that he denies all of the allegations or any criminality, but his judgment was so poor and so bad and so damaging that this censure was needed.
His behaviour in terms of what, like we were discussing a few days ago, whenever there's a royal event and they go to church, he like pushes himself to the front and all the cameras see him.
But it's also choosing to be a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, choosing to prolong that relationship. Were the timelines of that correct? They're now in doubt. all of that has all mixed up together here to feel that, there were already questions, of course, for a number of years about his lack of judgment, but that has just become a real difficulty in recent weeks.
And then the final sentence from this statement: Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very important bit of the statement to me, because what really struck me reading that was thinking about what the statement was like 2 weeks ago, that we had almost to the day from Prince Andrew himself, where he voluntarily relinquished his Duke of York title, Order of the Garter. That statement was in his own words. It was not exactly packed with contrition. He didn't at any point talk about victims of abuse and any thoughts or sympathies with them. It was a completely different mood. And I think tonight, as well as losing his home, losing his title, he has also lost the privilege to present his case in his own words in the way he wanted. This is an official Buckingham Palace statement. It is effectively a statement for the King. He has taken ownership, and they are hoping it will also mean that they now take control of this situation in terms of Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, and Victoria, I mean, basically, you could say something about every single word in that sentence, couldn't you?
Oh, I mean, when it says Their Majesties, does that include Daniela, Camilla? Does that include the Queen?
Yeah, 100%. And
Right.
I think that's important. I mean, I'm sure you're going to go on and say this, Victoria, but it's important, to talk about, what is at the centre of, Queen Camilla's public work. It is her work with victims of domestic abuse.
Absolutely, which is really important work, really sensitive work. And I've spoken to many survivors of domestic abuse, and they really appreciate her time, her care, the way she speaks to them, the work she does for the relevant charities in this sector. It's a big deal for people who come into contact with her when they're talking about this. So yeah, I mean that final sentence is huge, I think, and will mean an awful lot, one would have thought, to the family of Virginia Giuffre, who have also released a statement tonight that's saying that her truth and courage, as they put it, has brought down a prince.
Also, just that inclusion of the words "sympathies have been." That's the institution trying to make amends for like the last 10 years of this story, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. And definitely perhaps making amends for the last statement when there was no mention of sympathy or thoughts or victims. And I think, as Victoria said, the fact that we have a Queen who is doing an awful lot of important, powerful work around victims of abuse and domestic violence, to find themselves in this situation that was so complicated and messy, they absolutely just needed to find a way out of it.
And Victoria, the thing that's lodged in my mind since we were speaking multiple times when this was all unfolding in the last few weeks was the bit of Emily Maitlis's interview with Prince Andrew on Newsnight that I'd forgotten about, which is where he offered to help the case of the Epstein case, and also broadly to help people who'd gone through stuff like this. And the fact that then Virginia Giuffre writes in her book, and you spoke to her co-author about how he did none of that.
Absolutely. Amy Wallace, who is Virginia's co-author, said to us on Newsnight, he would help in the, I'm quoting exactly, he would help in the fight against the evils of sex trafficking. That was the statement he released alongside the settlement of the reported £12 million that he paid to Virginia Giuffre. And he said he would support the victims of sex trafficking. Amy Wallace raised the question. It was written by Virginia Giuffre in her book. Has he ever done that? Has he ever offered to give evidence to the FBI? Has he ever stepped forward and supported any victims of abuse? I mean, I don't know the answer. I suspect it's no, but there is still a chance for him to do that if he wishes to.
Daniela, just back on the other implications of this. Andrew's daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, they keep those titles.
They keep those titles. They remain Princess Beatrice of York and Princess Eugenie of York. I think there is a mood in the royal family that they need protecting. I mean, there are an awful lot of questions about who knew what and decisions that were made over the years. But I think at this point we find ourselves in now, I think they are popular members of the family. And I think, you have to remember that this, as well as being a public problem, there is an element of family, personal problem here. And there is a need. I think the king will feel a responsibility to the well-being of those two women and to ensure that he is doing his best by them in this situation that he finds himself in. So they have not been stripped of anything. They are not working royals. They have their own lives and they will continue to live those lives.
And to go back to the historical precedent, they then quote the palace sources who've been telling people about this, King George V's letters patent in 1917. So they've gone back to 1917.
Yes. Yeah, in order that they could hang on to those titles, yeah.
Right. One other thing. Do we know anything about the processology that's gone on here behind the scenes? For example, and I'm now just going to throw things out there that we probably will never know. Was this delivered as a sort of ultimatum to Andrew? Was this a negotiation between different staffs? Was there a showdown, or did actually Andrew sort of just consent to all of this with not much of a fight? What do we guess?
I think probably a bit of everything that you've said, except maybe the last line. I'm not sure he easily consented to all of this. This was clearly a negotiation and a conversation. Otherwise, it would have happened a bit sooner. I think when you directly ask questions of people in Buckingham Palace or around the royal family, was any of this against his will? Did he not want this to happen? As you would expect, the responses are very careful, but they say things like, the king initiated this process and his brother has not objected. So, that's the kind of answer you get to that sort of question.
That tells you the start and the end, but not the middle.
Exactly. And in terms of, why did it take so long? Could you not have done something quicker? Then, the mood music and the kind of answers are, well, the king wanted to be right, not rushed. He wanted to show careful, considered leadership as a king, but also as an older brother. And he wanted just to make sure this was absolutely perfect in terms of the legal and constitutional issues that surround it.
Now, you can tell I've been spending too much time on TikTok this week, because the next thing I want to ask is, what about William and Catherine's involvement in this? Because online, there is a lot of vibe around that angle.
Yeah. Can I just want to add something that Nick Watt, Newsnight's political editor, reported just a week ago, last Wednesday. He reported on the programme that there was cabinet unease, that the palace was in catch-up mode, was behind the story. But he was told by a senior government source that the government had been reassured, the cabinet had been reassured that, quote, William was on it. William was on it. That was the quote that Nick had. So I don't know. Obviously, Daniela, I don't have the kind of sourcing that you have. I have no idea what role William played. But I do remember you saying when we were last on Newscast together that along the lines of, William doesn't want to have to be dealing with this problem when he takes over.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there's no question he's had a role to play, and he's been in his father's ear. I don't think it's a secret that he wasn't keen on his Uncle Andrew and isn't keen on his Uncle Andrew and didn't want him to be a problem for him and didn't want him to be a problem for his father either. This time tomorrow night, I'll be on a flight to Rio de Janeiro where William is going to be doing some of his Earthshot Prize events and having a big awards ceremony in his environmental work.
With Kylie Minogue
and Shawn Mendes next Wednesday night. All excited about that. And I think, there was a real keenness from Kensington Palace, who represent William, not to have this hanging over them either. We were going to Rio over the weekend thinking, the Prince Andrew thing is in no way resolved. It's going to, blight this trip for him. We're going to want to know what he thinks about it the whole time. I think maybe what we've heard tonight's taken a little bit of the heat, maybe a little bit off that. I've talked to a number of people about William's role in this, and a lot of them have said it has been overplayed in the particularly in, I think, how it's been
on TikTok,
on social media and in some of the papers. Of course, he has a loud and strong voice in the discussions, but ultimately it is the king that has driven this. It is the private office, it is his private secretary in consultation with the government who have worked this through, and with the Crown Estate. So William is an influential, powerful, important voice. And actually, if you speak to other people who've been private secretaries in both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, and ask what their assessment is of how this would have played internally, they all say that, William would have been a very important factor and been listened to, but ultimately it was the king making this call.
And also, I mean, we learned from the whole Harry and Meghan saga, and it's so trite to say this, but this is not this is not an ordinary family. Like, it's much more like a corporation where teams of people get around tables and draw up pieces of paper, and there are drafts of things that are then haggled over. It's more like the EU having a summit than it is like you or me having an argument with our family members.
Yeah, it's incredibly formal. I mean, the idea that you're just picking up the phone and talking to your brother and saying, "Oh, look, can we have a chat about this? I'm really, these things aren't working out," or, William's ringing his father and just having an informal or sending a message. It does, as you say, it doesn't work like that. It's much more formal.
And Victoria, I mean, where do your journalistic instincts take you next in this story? No, I'm trying to outscoop you.
No. I mean, I'll be really interested to see how people react, what the polling tells us about, members of the public think now. Is this, will this satisfy the public? Should it go, bearing in mind he denies the allegations, should the police take this up? I don't, for what it's worth, I don't feel like it's over. I don't know why. I just don't. I think there's obviously going to be more to come from the US Oversight Committee. Yeah. There's going to be more emails at some point. Possibly the whole Epstein files will be released. I mean, it just doesn't feel over.
I just think there's two very powerful forces here. There's what you alluded to there in America, which is the MAGA movement. Like, there's a real movement now applying pressure to all different bits of the American political system to get more information out there. And that's taking on a huge momentum. And as we know, just when you think the information is going to stop coming, more is unearthed. So there's that. Yeah. And then also just that I'm thinking about that statement from Virginia Giuffre's family about her courage bringing down a prince. That sort of thing is infectious. And I'm sure there will be people tonight who haven't felt that they've got the strength to come forward. This will give them a push and will give them some strength. And so that will change that dynamic as well.
Totally. I mean, Virginia Giuffre's brother, Sky, and sister-in-law have just been on Newsnight. The sister-in-law broke down when she heard the news that the king was removing this title from Andrew. And she's said, it truly is a moment for her and all survivors. So you may well be absolutely right there, Adam, that it's going to give a lot of people courage and power that they can change things and right injustices.
And I think that is a problem for Buckingham Palace in terms of how they control this, because quite simply they can't. There are so many strands to the Jeffrey Epstein, Prince Andrew story and the wider Epstein story that they're just not in control of. Met Police investigations, inquiries in Congress, what other victims and other women might now feel emboldened to do in terms of telling their story. There is nothing they can do about that. I think also that the way the book has been opened on royal finances and the sort of poking around that, again, I think that door has now been kicked open a little bit in terms of what happens around, royal estates and money and profits and tax. All of that's been an open debate, and that it can be a difficult area for the royal family.
Also, just while we've been talking, an update on another story, which is the whole Rachel Reeves not having the right licence to be a landlord. Downing Street has just released an exchange of letters between the Prime Minister and his independent advisor on ministerial standards, Laurie Magnus. And the final paragraph of the letter from Magnus to Starmer talks about the fact that what the Chancellor said on Wednesday night, when she said she didn't know she needed a licence, wasn't the same as what ended up happening on Thursday when it turns out the letting agent just hadn't got the licence. Laurie Magnus says it was clear that the Chancellor's husband just hadn't recalled that exchange, with the result that it's regrettable that information provided on successive days had generated confusion. But Laurie Magnus says he finds no evidence of bad faith. So another denouement for another story on this breaking episode of Newscast. Daniela, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
And Victoria, thanks to you too.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening to this second helping of Newscast on Thursday, the 30th of October.